Although Helldivers 2's biggest battle continues to be its servers, I think we should speculate and talk about some upcoming changes that the game needs, as well as possibly an awesome new game mode considering how many players there are. I'm going to break this video down into two parts. The first part being the big game mode change that I think this game really needs, and then the second part of the video will be things like changes to game modes, missions, and other stuff like that. So to start things off, I think Helldivers 2 would absolutely benefit from a raid-style game mode. So currently Helldivers 2 is absolutely suffering from success. Yes, there are so many players online, and I'm sure tons of your friends have this and want to play with you. The only downside is you can only queue up with 3 of your friends for a total of 4 players playing one single mission. But what if you can have so much more than that? You know when you're looking out of your ship on a planet you're about to liberate, and you can see things like other ships and stratagems down below? Theoretically, those are real-time players that are around you that you could technically queue up with. Or it's just cleverly disguised assets that seemingly simulate the other players that are around you. What I think would be awesome would be to queue up with the other ships around you in an epic raid-style mission. Imagine up to 16 Helldivers all grouped together to attack a super planet. Taking down these super challenging raids could add tons of influence to a planet that you are attacking. Just like when you complete a mission and you fractionally increase the amount of planet liberated, these raids can be a bigger impact, maybe 20 points that you get for completing it rather than a squad contribution of 3. And the missions on the raid modes could actually make sense for what you're doing. Let's take a look at the Terminids and speculate from there. It could start off with trying to take out a couple of their nests and destroying some of their eggs and spawn points. Once you've done that, you can get intel from Super Earth that plays while you're in mission, telling you about, let's say, more stalker lairs that are in the zone. Completing these can have the players pick up the various different samples or like parts that the enemy drops after you've completed the objective. These parts should now be brought to, let's say, a terminal where you have to upload biometric data and defend it for, let's say, a couple of minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And while you're uploading this data, things like Bile Titans can spawn, chargers, and of course dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds, of other Terminids. Considering the fact that there could be up to 16 players on these raids, they need to make them super difficult. And this will also let all these other players have different types of equipment. That way it's not 16 people just running around with a breaker shotgun. You could actually have people using marksman rifles or even laser rifles. Or heck, even an SMG. But I digress. As this raid continues, it will have you do more and more difficult challenges. And maybe the climax of one of these raids could be all 16 players calling in a support beacon from the Pelicans. This will bring the Pelican dropships in and they can fight from above, shooting down at swarms upon swarms of almost unbeatable Terminids. And from here, you're working to defend the final extraction. Maybe they can make it with your extracting with some super important thing from the Terminids.
The socialist automatons.
Now let's take a look at what can be done with the automatons. Right now, the automatons are, of course, much more difficult than the Terminids. So much so that most Helldivers are avoiding fighting them, causing us to lose the war. Please, people, go fight the automatons. Stop being cowards. But a raid like this could be absolutely fantastic. The players will start off on the planet in different groups of up to 4, for a total, of course, of 16 players, all dropping in different locations. Of course, they can all meet up with each other and do a whole 16-man marathon and run from objective to objective, but we know the automatons like to gather where the players are. So if all 16 Helldivers group up, it's going to be a super war the entire time. But launching the ICBM in some of these missions really gives me an awesome idea. What if the goal for the automaton raid is to launch an ICBM missile that actually affects the gameplay of the raid? So let's say that there's some super hard base that can't be destroyed and you don't have a hell bomb for whatever lore reason. The point of this raid could be ultimately to go launch the ICBM at the super base and destroy it with that missile. Of course, it can start off simple by attacking some of their minor bases. Like the first goal can be destroy maybe 20 or 30 automaton bases. And of course, these raids are going to have to be much longer, possibly up to a maximum of, I don't know, an hour and a half to a 2-hour mission. Potentially, who knows about the time. After the fabricators are destroyed, you're going to get a message that says you have to disable the scramblers that are stopping call-ins from happening. So you go with your groups and destroy the various satellite bases. Let's say there's a total of 4 jammers throughout the bigger planet that you have to go unjam. Once that is done, you should now have to search for the codes in order to launch the missiles. So let's say there's a total of 4 ICBMs that have to be launched by the end of it. This way, each squad is responsible for getting all their own launch codes and setting up the missile while still all working together. And because the automatons are always attacking you, you know there's going to be constant action all the time. And once again, this will lead to a better gameplay loop where other players can feel the need to use things like more marksman rifles and other things. That way you just don't have like the same meta weapons constantly revolving. But anyway, maybe this raid can end where all 4 players queue up the missiles, they launch it, they put in the codes, it's still the same 9 steps as it is prior, but this time all the squads are working in tandem to shoot all the missiles at once. Just imagine how glorious it would be to see 4 ICBM missiles launch at a super base that's off in the distance. And you can potentially go to that super base and try to thin the numbers. That way you could have a squad constantly fighting them off, but ultimately it could only be destroyed with those ICBMs. Then, once the raid is done, I think it should give some awesome new rewards. Of course, medals and experience, but I think these raids should also start to award super credits. That way, it'll incentivize more players to keep doing this raid once they've leveled up and unlocked almost everything that they've wanted to unlock. Of course, aside from the game being awesome and super fun, a lot of players still need an incentive to keep playing. So that's what I think could happen for a raid style event. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Now, let's move on to some gameplay changes. Right now, Helldivers 2 is completely balanced on various objectives that you need to do while staying mobile. The problems start to arise during these defend events, especially when you're battling the automatons and trying to evacuate 30, 40, or 50 citizens. Yes, right now there is a meta between using the EMS and the mortars and the smoke bombs, but ultimately, that's not fun to do. And unfortunately, these missions also tend to turn into a grind fest with these ones and the normal survival missions. Right now, I think these survival missions and the defend events should not be levels themselves. They should only be events that happen on difficult planets, possibly only in that raid mode I talked about earlier. Trying to run around in a circle and free civilians and not be able to really use your stratagems because you have to take the meta in order to win, honestly just becomes not fun. It also sucks when you're trying to liberate a planet and get the medal bonuses and you see that there is a defend event on the level where you need to evacuate the scientists, and you probably just won't do it because it's not worth playing it and failing the mission. And you already see these defend events actually happening on other planets that's just a normal sub-mission inside the planet. Those ones, of course, are much easier and it's more palatable to actually play that because it's possible to beat that one. The problem with these defend events where you're trying to evacuate the civilians, Helldivers 2 is just not a game balanced around that. The game is balanced around using super powered stratagems and finding holes in the enemy weakness. But when you reduce that to such a small zone, it makes it problematic. But that's why the stakes are so high when you're trying to actually extract. Sometimes you have 2 minutes, 4 minutes, and 6 minutes to defend a small zone for a small amount of time. That's what makes extracting so difficult. If you go too far away from it, the ship tells you that they're not going to land. That's fine, that can stay. Now, let's move on to the normal survival missions. I call them survival missions. I know there's something else, but all encompassing, let's call them survival missions. These ones, you get about 10, sometimes 12 minutes to destroy 200 enemies, 175 or 150, depending on the difficulty. Now, these missions just tend to be a farm and grind fest. And what happens here, it attracts, well, let's just say the certain type of player. The meta becomes you use mortars, maybe some landmines, you camp in a zone, and the mission essentially plays itself out with the enemies just dying, and you're able to extract in, well, sometimes 3-5 minutes. And that sucks because it's taken away the core and the soul of the game. But the problem here that I'm underlining is that a lot of people find these missions out and they do them over and over again because it's the best way to farm for medals. Even on impossible and hell dive missions, you don't really have to worry about the tanks or the Bile Titans if you just throw mortars out or guns or landmines and kill the smaller ones and just get to up to 200 fairly quickly. Especially with 4 people, it goes very, very quickly. And then what ends up happening is people ignore those other really fun missions. What the game is meant to be. Running around on a planet, liberating it, blowing up different objectives. So why play on those other levels where you're running around trying to find medals in certain crates when you could just get pretty much free medals all the time just by doing those missions? I'm not saying they have to be removed entirely because I'm a huge fan of horde and survival based stuff. I'm just saying make these ones possibly an event on other planets It could also be an event in the raid itself. But I just think that these type of missions need to be reappropriated because it's kind of doing more harm than good overall to the game. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments section as well. I want to discuss that. Now let's talk about some other changes involving things like the equipment. Of course, we know the armor's bugged, but let's talk about the weapons and whatnot. If you guys didn't know, as of recording this video, the armor is bugged. Light armor, medium, and heavy armor pretty much all do the same things. So if you're wearing a heavy armor, all you're doing is getting negative effects. You may look beefier, but you're just slower. It basically gives you the same stats as wearing light armor, which I'm sure, of course, they are going to fix. But what I think would be pretty cool about armor is more customization options. Sometimes I want to wear armor, but I don't necessarily like the look of it. I like the design. So it would be cool in the Superstore if maybe we could buy different color palettes and then we ourselves can customize our own armor. That way they're not taking away things that are in the Superstore. But that's enough about armor. I want to talk about the weapons. Most of the primary weapons that you use, let's just say it all together, aren't that good. Right now the meta seems to be the breaker shotgun. I have been having some fun trying to use other weapons and whatnot, especially using an SMG on the automatons is really fun, but I could pretty much do the same damage if not more and kill the same amount of enemies if not more if I was just using the breaker, which is unfortunate, especially because there's like 3 variations of the breaker itself in the game you unlock. So I do think the weapons need to be retooled, and I hope that we get more and different types of weapons. I don't know about you guys, but I pretty much stopped using the light machine gun and the stalwart because I needed to make room for other stratagems. And yes, I know you can find these pickups in different missions, but most of the time I don't want to sacrifice my other weapon I'm carrying. If I'm using a spear to fire long range and blow up automaton bases, or I'm bringing the grenade launcher to destroy the terminated structures, I don't really want to drop that just to have a better machine gun. So I do think certain things need to be reappropriated and switched back to a primary slot. And also some of the other guns just seem, well, pretty terrible. It took me a long time to unlock that spray and pray other breaker shotgun, and it's terrible. Why is it so bad? I used it against the automatons, and of course it didn't really do that much damage. It's too much spread and whatnot. So I figured, all right, this might be a weapon best suited against terminids. And then I used it on the terminids and it was still terrible. 0 armor penetration. Yes, I can kill the really small bugs, but everything else, no. I just switched back to the normal breaker and was able to, well, use that one more effectively. Another offender is the laze scythe. Of course, that one should be an automaton clearer. And at times I find myself being really conflicted with this weapon because sometimes I aim right on the automatons' heads and kill them with ease, and I just bring the laser beam back and forth and I'm just dropping bodies. But other times it seems to just not do damage and miss, even on right on their critical point. And if you're not using that for the automatons and you try to use it for the terminids, you might as well just be turning on a garden hose and spraying them with it barely does any damage. I don't necessarily need to complain about every single weapon. I'm just saying that a lot of these weapons need to be either reappropriated and retooled. Then there's some of the stratagems. For the most part, the stratagems seem fairly balanced, but one of the main offenders to me is the 500 kilogram bomb. This thing either seems to work or never work. I've called in that 500 kilogram bomb right on objectives, watch it blow up and do 0 damage and get no kills, even though there's tons of enemies around it. So there's something definitely wrong with that stratagem. Now let's talk about team-based weapons. A lot of times when I'm fighting against the automatons, I bring a spear. That gives me a lockable rocket launcher and a backpack that I can reload myself, but if I have a teammate that's wearing the backpack, they can almost instantly reload it for me. The problem there is that my teammate can now not wear a backpack of their choosing. Let's say they wanted to run a shield or a dog to protect them. If I want them to quickly reload my weapon, they need to be wearing my backpack. I think the fix should just be for the person using the spear to be wearing the backpack, and then their teammate can do a team reload from there. That way you're not sacrificing your teammate's backpack slot so they reload for you. This makes sense, especially considering the spear itself can be reloaded by yourself, similar to how you would reload that light machine gun you get on one knee and just put in a new rocket. So the trouble here is that it takes up a backpack slot, and your other teammate is not going to want to sacrifice their shield or their backpack just so they can reload you. These team-based weapons are pretty much, well, just for the memes right now. They don't actually have a workable gameplay function. But if they do want to keep them, they should just have it that the player that's using it should just be wearing the backpack and their teammate can reload it from there. The other thing I want to talk about right now is aiming in the game and also movement. If you haven't noticed right now, you basically have 2 reticles on the screen at all times. You have your main one, and then this floating circle one, and that's pretty much your hip fire accuracy. Sometimes I don't mind that it's there, but it can be distracting. If there was a way to actually actively turn that off and never see it again, I would like that. You can currently turn it on dynamic, which means it only appears when you're ADSing, but then it begs the question, why would I want my hip fire accuracy to be appearing on screen while I'm aiming down sights? I understand the sentiment to make it a little bit more difficult to aim, but honestly, I think that this feature is actually taking away from the game more than it's actually helping, especially when you're fighting the automatons. Let's say you're using one of the marksman rifles or the anti-material rifles. Right now, those weapons have a little bit too much sway for how accurate you need to be on some of these automatons. It's bad enough that while you're ADSing with these ones and you get shot, your character flinches and you end up aiming towards the sky or towards the ground. So I think if they just reduce the weapon sway of these ones just a little bit and possibly reduce the flinching, you will see a massive uptick in those type of weapons being used. Because right now this game is pretty much like a run and gun type of event, and you really don't have time to just be sitting there and scoping. And then if you do actually find the time to use an anti-material rifle or a marksman rifle, odds are you're probably going to get shot by a random automaton that's just machine gunning blindly. And this will make you flinch and miss all your shots, leading to a rocket devastator or someone else completely obliterating you. Now I want to talk about the movement. The movement itself is pretty fantastic, I'm not going to lie. However, I do wish that they would disable auto mantling while sprinting. Now I don't know if that's currently a feature, I didn't see it in the settings, but too many times have I found myself sprinting where I wanted to take cover and my character either ends up climbing on top of something or jumping over it. It's super frustrating when you're running for your life and you are betting on just stopping in a certain location. So just add a feature to turn off auto mantling while sprinting. Well, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. Yes, there are some other normal bugs in the game like no clipping and falling through walls and whatnot, but we really don't need to talk about them in this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I want to discuss all these ideas, and maybe we could see some of these ones come to fruition in the actual game itself. But once again, this could just be automaton propaganda.